Welcome to this series where we are going to model and UV unwrap this model right here. This is a bonsai tree I made, and it's going to be made in ZBrush and Maya. So this will be the first part, which will be the actual construction of the base mesh. So let's get to it. As you can see, I'm doing this in ZBrush because we are making a tree, and I figured since bonsai trees generally have a lot of like different varying forms and shapes and a lot of really distinct branches and stuff like that, I figured that using ZSpheres would be a very good idea. Generally with trees you do want to do that anyways because ZSpheres are very useful with branches and similar things like that. So here I'm just basing out the form of the base of the tree. And it's very, I obviously, as you do, you should have when you model something, I have a lot of reference up on another window right now, or well, I have two monitors running a dual monitor setup, so I have reference up on the other one, and I'm watching that as I go along, and using different kinds of references for different kinds of the tree and mixing them together. Reference is very important when modeling, and whilst you may think they can do stuff without reference, really I prefer to just keep with reference basically when I do anything. Even if I'm really comfortable in doing what I do, I find that doing it with reference is just, there's no downside to it. Generally it can just get better, so I'll keep it to that. So here I'm basing out the shape. I found that it was a bit too straight in the side view, watching it from the x-axis, and so I figured I would fix it up a bit, making it a bit more non-uniform. And that just keeps it very interesting to the viewer. What you want to keep in mind is that, sure, it's meant to look like a tree, but not all trees, really, or all things that you model generally are going to look interesting. And if you want your model to look interesting, you need to kind of incorporate some maybe not so human or not so real effects into it to make it look more interesting. This is just a lot of different things you need to keep in mind. So here I'm realizing how big the tree is actually going to be, so I'm going to scale up and change the scale of a lot of things using the W, E, and RT QWERTY keys on your keyboard to toggle between the move, scale, and rotate tools on with the zpheres, obviously using those. Mostly scale and move at this point, but rotate will probably come in later on because rotate is also useful. So pressing A when having your zpheres up previews your adaptive skin. Basically, if you don't know what that means, basically it just previews how the model is going to look when you remove it from the zphere kind of skeleton. So you'll be able to see how your zpheres look at an actual model, as you can see I just did right there. So here, interesting, with trees you want it to kind of look interesting from all different directions. So just from the front it looks cool, and then you kind of want it to go in, you want it to be deep, basically. You want some tree branches behind other branches on top of other, basically doing that, because that just adds a lot more kind of detail for the viewer to look at, and that's very important, I think, because it you want your model to look interesting. You want them to keep like looking at it, because that just makes it look better. Also, important thing to note is alt-clicking on a Z-sphere will delete it, so that's what I did right there before. Also, yes, you'll see on the video that it looks like I have two cursors. This is just an artifact of the recording software I use, so just disregard that. Just look at the Z-sphere outline, or ZBrush outline, sorry, and you'll see what my actual mouse is doing. The other one is just, I'm not entirely sure what happened with that. So here I'm adding another branch. This one also I'm going to add. With Z-spheres, you don't want to overdo the Z-spheres, because if you put in too many, it gets really hard to control. And that's why I'm keeping it very simple right now, because really doing a lot of things with the Z-spheres around, it's very easy to unintentionally mess up your Z-sphere mesh. Here, what you see there, when you up the size of your brush using Z-spheres, it actually adds a soft fall-off on your brush when modifying the movement of your spheres, basically. So it's like using soft select, basically, when doing it. Here I'm saving my project. Very important thing to do when saving in any program, especially ZBrush, when you deal with a lot of polygons. Maybe I'm not doing it that way now, but I will later on. It's very important to keep in mind that you want to save in increments, so you don't want to just keep one single save. You want to save it like what I do here. I call this tree tutorial 001, and then I go 002 on the next save, and then I go 003, and then so on and so forth. This is just so that if my software crashes, which it really does tend to do a lot of the time, which is just the case with computers, it isn't always that reliable. Basically, if it crashes, I still have something to get back to, so I don't just lose everything if I do get a crash. And believe me, when you do these sort of things for a long period of time, you will get a lot of crashes. So you just need to be aware of that. See here, I'm adding some very interesting parts to this, trying to play around with the dimensions, kind of just seeing how things work out. I obviously these branches I have referenced up to see how they actually do go on a real tree. So. And why I chose a bonsai tree instead of like a regular oak tree or something like that, I just found the bonsai trees to be more interesting looking. They have a lot more like subtle detail going on, and a lot more like crazy roots and stuff, and I mean that's just makes it more fun for me, because just doing a normal straight tree, that would kind of bore me, to be honest. Maybe that's just me, but I want to have fun while modeling, so yeah. Here I'm going to oversize the base a bit, because, well, it's going to be a pretty fat tree, to be honest. Trees aren't very small, and I realize that, so here again we are going to do a lot. And if you change into the draw tools, obviously what I'm doing, this is going to be more of an intermediate tutorial, so if you don't know what these things do, I will make another tutorial explaining that later on, so yes. So here you can see that we have very interesting geometry, like branches overlapping, stuff like that. You can see what it does to the model. It really does improve how cool it looks, basically, and you want your model to look cool, so that's very good. So you're moving some more branches. I don't really like the look of that, so I'm going to remove it and, you know, fix it up a bit later on. So yeah, it's very, very important just to keep things rough at the start. Really, with ZSpheres, you don't actually remember that you're making the base mesh right now. Afterwards, you're going to take this in, or well, I will. Anyways, this is what I did to make the model. What you do is you make it a polymesh 3D, and then you sculpt it, and then you add the details. You don't want to. Well, it gets very easy to want to kind of overdo it in the ZSpheres, because ZSpheres are very fun to play around with. You really don't. We want to keep in mind not overdoing things, because overdoing things generally is just going to bite you in the ass at the end of it, and of course that's not very good, so just don't do that. Just keep it basic, keep it, just rough out the shape, because this tree, I mean, trees generally don't have too much detail. A lot of it is just the surface, and so the base is actually going to be more visible than you think. It's not going to be like if you make a character and the base is just very simple and you sculpt literally everything on top of that. A tree is, it's very base heavy, basically. It's very based on the base. That sounded ridiculous, but you get what I mean. So here we're going to try something silly out. It looks pretty dumb, but it'll get better, of course, it'll get better. Drawing on top of the, making a base sphere and then drawing different ones on top of that to make it better. Also, you want to keep in mind how the leaves are going to fall on these branches. You don't just want to keep it very, very, like, completely random, just poking up everywhere. That's not going to do you very well. You want to keep in mind how the leaves are going to form, how it's going to look when you actually give it the leaves and stuff like that. It's very, very... It's not very... It sounds kind of, I guess, advanced. It sounds like another thing you just need to think about, but it's not that hard, really. You just have to picture a lot of leaves on your tree. So here I'm upping the resolution, the density of my adaptive skin, which you notice there on the side, in the side panel, which is labeled adaptive skin. That's where you do that. And that just shows how the model is going to look with a high resolution of geometry. So you can easily see there how the how geometry would look and stuff like that. So it helps if you see like an odd like deformation or something like that in the geometry and need to fix that. So but I think that's what I saw here. I'm trying to scale some stuff up because it didn't look very well. You can see that I have this really hard crease between those two branches right there. So I'm going to try and I'm trying to remove that step by step here, and I don't think I completely succeed, but it really doesn't matter too much. So we'll see how we go on further. Trying to add, again, the base of the tree was very, very straight, and I mean, trees, you don't want to keep them just straight. I mean, sure, there are straight trees, there are tons of them, but I mean, it's very dull to look at, very, very dull. So I try to keep my stuff crooked and very like twisty and turny and very interesting. So that's what I'm doing right now. Scaling, keeping things upscale, trying to clean the geometry up. I mean, you want to keep the geometry to be clean because while you can actually fix it up later on in the sculpting process, it's just generally just a lot easier to fix these odd creases and stuff in the ZSpheres. So it's good to keep that in mind and trying to. I mean, it's not necessary. You can certainly just ignore that and do it all later. But it's good to just like do basic things to help you out later on, and that's just what we're doing right here. So I'm going to try and play around with a bit of stuff, trying to make some really like extruding, protruding details like that, which I kind of like, but then again I don't. I mean, it's an interesting detail, sure, but I think I end up scrapping it because it's not very interesting. And that's a lot of the process of this. Obviously, yes, I'm using reference, but I'm not going just from reference. I'm just going from, I mean, a lot of modeling is just having fun. That's all it is. So I'm just playing around a bit. Here we're going to do the roots, which roots are also another thing. Roots are, since I'm going to have, the idea with this is that I'm going to have some roots that are actually sticking out of the ground. It's going to be in a pot-like thing, as you saw at the start of the video, and I'm going to have some roots like coming out of the ground, just to show that it's really a tree, which helped with the immersion, basically. So I'm have some roots shown, and you want roots to be really random in nature, because that's what they are. So I'm going to have a lot of them like overlapping on top of it. But it's basically the same theory as with the branches. You want it to look interesting, so therefore you add a lot of differentiating detail with it. If you just keep the roots very straight, they become like instantly very boring. So here I'm playing around with how I want the roots to actually like look coming out of the bottom of the tree. It's not the most important thing, because the bottom of the tree is actually going to be connected through dirt, so you're not going to see the bottom of the tree, but it's something you want to keep in mind, basically. So I'll just see how we go along here. I'm going to add a bit of stuff on the back as well. Important to keep all parts of your model, like the back. Like I made this model for a final render. That's all I wanted with this model. So I didn't actually have to, because I already had the like direction I wanted to take the final render in my head, so I already did plan out how it was going to look, and it's basically just almost a straight frontal view, a bit above frontal, but so I don't actually need to really put any detail into the back. But it's kind of like one of those things you just want to do if you. I mean, it's obviously up to you. You don't need to do it by any means. There's no one forcing you to do it. But I just like doing it because if I do end up doing something else with it, if I don't have anything on the back, it just looks very, very boring. Like if you put this into a game engine, you want this to be able to look nice on every single front, and that's what we are trying to do here. So here I'm trying to play around with seeing how roots will look if we start them from the back of the tree and then have them like swirl around to the front, and I end up liking that a lot. So here I'm going to rotate some roots and trying to make them look cool. Hopefully succeeding with that too. So here you can see I'm doing what I just said, keeping it, and you can see that I'm making it so that it curls under the other ones, which I think looks very nice. I like that, although obviously very sharp right now, but that's because it's very basic. It's a very basic mesh, so we just keep that in mind, and we go on further with our modeling. And I'm going to try and take up a lot of space with these roots, like actually have them be quite large, or well, quite long in size. Just to kind of give perspective that it's a big tree, and, well, I mean, it's a bonsai tree, so it's by definition not very big, but, like, have the feeling that it could be a big tree, and, you know, that's very cool, I think. Like, a lot of the tree aspects, a lot of what makes a tree, I think, is its size. Like, bonsai trees, they're not very big, but what defines them is kind of the size. It's kind of why it is a bonsai tree, and like other trees, they're big because they are. I mean, small trees, they wouldn't really look like trees. You wouldn't recognize them as a tree. So I'm trying to keep the size relative, like trying to make it very obvious to what it basically is. Just keeping it, make it so that when you just look at it for the first time, you just straight up know that it's a tree, and you know your brain recognizing it right away. And it sounds very silly just keeping all those things in mind, but it's just very slight things you kind of want to keep in mind while working on this. I'm scaling some of these down because I mean I don't like, sure you can have like just one ZSpheres size overall, but I kind of like making my branches taper out by the end so that they're smaller by the end than they were at the start. Here I'm going to try adding a rock. Actually, I'm going to try adding a rock by the end of it. I'm trying a lot of things. That looks very, very strange, of course. That messes up the geometry a lot. You don't actually want overlapping ZSpheres generally. It's not a very good thing to have. But I'm playing around with it right now. I completely lost my train of thought too. So yeah, I don't actually remember what I was talking about, but yes. So let's see what we're doing here. I'm trying out making a large root from the back there, just making it sideways. I don't think I'll end up keeping this because it looks very kind of awkward, really. You want the roots to look natural because a tree is basically very, very natural. It's like the most natural thing you can have. I think at this point is where I realized I could just make it a rock, like making it stand out as a rock, and I think I'm going to do that later on. Another one of those details that isn't even shown by the end of it because I didn't render it out in that like direction, but it's just one of those things that adds, I think adds detail. I mean, adds quality to the model. I like being able to put my model in a turntable and just be able to watch all sides of it and have it look good. So that's what I'm trying to adhere to right now. Again, a lot of this is just personal preference. You don't need to do that if you don't want to. Obviously, if you're under time constraints, if it's like a paid project you're meant to do under a certain period of time, just for the final render, obviously you want to do it very efficiently and very quickly. You don't probably want to spend more time on stuff like in the back than you really would otherwise. So you can easily just skip that stuff down. Okay, I'm adding some very small branches and detailing it out. While it is a base, it's it's a lot easier adding branches in here than it is with just the ZBrush brushes. And, you know, that's just the way of it. So I'm going to do that, because with brushes, sure you could do it, but it's going to be very squishy, basically. Here you can get a very defined and very easily managed branch, and I think that's a very good thing. So yeah, I'm trying to go really like crazy with the branches, trying to make a lot of them, because the more the merrier, the way I see it, because obviously a real tree has so many branches, so you can't really realistically make as many branches as a real tree has, but I'll make a couple. I mean, why not? I mean, sure, the more the merrier as well. I mean, this is just for fun. This was a hobby project. I did not do this because someone told me. I just did it because I did. So, I mean, it was, I mean, I didn't have any kind of time constraints, and I think I didn't get paid for it or anything like that. I did it because I wanted to put up more videos for you guys. I haven't put up videos in a long time, so I figured I'd do that. And, you know, it's just for fun, this project, so I have a lot of time on my hands. So I think we're closing up to a pretty recognizable base mesh. I think, yeah, we are. So a lot of what I'm going to do right now is just detailing, trying to make sure that everything scales right, trying to make sure everything is kind of non-uniform, non-equal to the other. I mean, you don't want it to look symmetrical. Of course, it's very difficult to make the with a tree, but that's the last thing you want to do with organic objects. Don't make them look symmetrical. That's why I don't really like mirroring stuff on things like characters. I mean, it works, but if you do mirror stuff, like, say if you make half a face, if you sculpt half a face, or maybe like one side of the face or something like that, and you mirror it over, it's fine if you don't have a lot of time, but I think you should go in afterwards and just vary it up a bit, because nothing organic is symmetrical. Nothing is, and oftentimes you'll notice that when you make it symmetrical, it just removes that kind of life feeling out of it. That's what I see with a lot of like game models in particular. If you look at the models in a lot of video games recently, they're very symmetrical in their looks, and I think that really does detract from their from the realisticness of them, of the actual models, of the look of them. So I think very important. I mean, it's understandable why they do it. They save time. It's obviously very comfortable doing that. But if you do that to save time, I think it's just fine going in, do another pass on it afterwards when it's done, and just like mess it up a bit, like move an eye slightly, like maybe deform the nose a bit, something like that, just to make it a bit different. Because no one is symmetrical, and symmetrical models generally are quite bad to have unless they're really mechanical, and mechanical things obviously can easily be symmetrical because they usually are. So as you can see, we have quite the recognizable base mesh here. We're quite close to the end of finishing sculpting here. Oh well, not sculpting, we're actually going to start sculpting afterward. But yeah, we're going to add a bit more detail first of all, and then we're going to sculpt in our actual like detail pass. So we're going to make it look like a tree. Yeah. Again, the leaves, you don't sculpt those, by the way, if you didn't know. Those are made by putting a lot of planes in and then putting alpha textures on those. or the way I did it was, because just to make it easier on my rendering, I edited the leaves in afterwards. I edited the leaves in afterwards in Photoshop in the render, because while the rendering software I used more was a toolbag, didn't quite like my alpha textures, so I mean, that's the way it is, isn't it? So let's see here, we go a little further, and we see that we are almost done. We have about a minute left, I believe, and here I'm just repositioning things, doing the final, because I know by this point that I'm basically done with the model, with the base of the model, so all I'm doing is tweaking it, making it look better, trying to make it see, I'm looking at it from the front perspective, and trying to make it sure that I can actually see all the detail I have in from the front perspective, not missing out anything, so stuff that's behind that like gets hidden by other branches, I rotate a bit, to make sure you can see them from the front, because I don't like making a lot of stuff and then having them not show. I mean, like those branches, they just look a lot better when they're actually shown, unsurprisingly. So I believe this is right about where we finished looking around. Obviously, you don't want to focus on one area of the model, like, at a time. You want to kind of zoom out and just look at the entire thing as a whole. That's what I do here. Very important just to keep yourself in perspective, because it's very easy to get snowed in a certain certain space, and then just forget about everything else. So here I'm just setting some materials, probably just saving a bit, looking around, figuring out that I'm quite happy with the model, and tweaking some stuff here on the bottom, but then realizing that it really doesn't matter. I think I'm going to add one more little root there. I'm going to tweak it a bit later on, and yeah, there we are. I think that's the last minute adjustment. See, one more that goes under that one. Actually, no, it's going to go over it. Yeah, it goes over that one. Which I think adds a lot to the experience that it is a natural object. See, that looks very nice. So that was the final touch there. I think that was about it. Yeah, it was. Let's just see here, saving a bit, and see, it looks very, very just squishy, and that's the way models look at the start. It looks very squishy, like a gummy, like something like that, and you know, it's just fine, go with it. So that was basically this part. Well, it wasn't this part, in fact. That was modeling the entire base model of it in ZBrush. The zpheres are a very, very powerful component of ZBrush, and I really do think that you should use them as much as possible. Well, I mean, just try using them in your projects for yourself. So that was it for this part. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next bit, which will be sculpting. Yes, indeed, sculpting the details. That'll be very fun, so we'll go through that, watch me do my final touches, and yes, then we are in fact done. So yeah, thanks.